This is a story of how the Americans, Soviets, and even the Cubans fought together to break a nation that would have changed the entire world. In 1960, Somalia gained independence, and back then it was the only country in Africa that could draw its own borders. Sounds empowering, doesn't it? Unfortunately, Somalia had a dream so large that it scared its neighbors to death. Somalia wanted to unite all Somali-speaking regions, parts of Kenya, Djibouti, and Ethiopia. But Ethiopia wasn't having it. And guess what? Ethiopia was the golden child for both the US and the Soviets. And when Somalia went to war in 1977, the superpowers flipped the script. The Soviets were Somalia's allies, until they weren't. The second Somalia moved against Ethiopia, the Soviets sent weapons, tanks, and even Cuban soldiers to fight Somalia. Meanwhile, the US, they armed Ethiopia too, and Somalia went from a Cold War pawn to a global outcast overnight. The war was a disaster. Thousands died, the economy tanked, and by 1991, the government collapsed. No banks, no police, just warlords, chaos, and foreign powers lurking in the shadows. In 1993, the US came again, not to rebuild, but to flex. The Black Hawk Down incident taught Americans that Somalia doesn't bow, so the US left. Ethiopia invaded in 2006, the US launched drone strikes, and the proxy wars were raging, while the people were trapped in a cycle of violence. But while the world saw Somalia as a failed state, it was quietly building something extraordinary. By 2020, 70% of Somalis were using mobile money, which is more than the US or Europe. No banks? No problem. Somalia created one of the most innovative digital economies, but foreign powers still weren't thrilled. Why? Because Somalia is sitting on 110 billion barrels of oil, and a strong, stable Somalia taking care of its own resources, that's a risk they're not going to take.